My name is Leah Vance, and for 12 years, I have survived on the quiet rhythm of midnight vitals, humming monitors, and steady breathing. I work the night shift in the intensive care unit at St. Camillus Hospital in Dayton, Ohio, a demanding environment where human life is measured in precise arterial blood gases, hourly urine output, and the cool, unyielding discipline of clinical protocol. Working 12-hour shifts among beeping ventilators teaches a woman how to maintain an internal pulse of 60 beats per minute, even while everything around her is actively falling apart. When my shift ends at 7 in the morning, I drive 15 minutes south to my 2-bedroom condo in Maple Crossing, over in Kettering, leaving behind the sterile hospital corridors for the quiet warmth of home. I bought that condo in the spring of 2021, and even now, 3 years later, I can still recall the exact physical sensation of turning the solid brass key in the deadbolt for the very first time. I was 29 years old, a newly single mother stepping across the threshold of the first door that had ever belonged entirely to me and my child. That summer, my 7-year-old son, Noah, was all knobby knees, endless curiosity, and bright, ringing laughter, learning to ride his bicycle without training wheels across our paved parking lot. Watching over us from his front stoop was our neighbor, Arthur Artie Pendleton, a 70-year-old retired sheriff's deputy with 30 years of active patrol experience, a slow-swinging porch chair, and an ancient basset hound named Barnaby, who lazily supervised the entire residential complex from the shade of an oak tree. In that peaceful, sunlit parking lot, surrounded by Artie's gentle words of encouragement and Barnaby's soft, thumping tail, I truly believed I had constructed an impenetrable sanctuary for my son, a safe, honest world completely isolated from the unspoken trauma and heavy obligations of my past. Every Tuesday evening, without a single exception, I loaded Noah into my old SUV and drove across town to my parents' home on Kettering Avenue for dinner. In the Vance household, Tuesday dinner was an unshakable institution, etched into my mother Carol's calendar, and events on my mother's calendar occurred with the relentless inevitability of the changing tides. For as long as I could remember, my official role in our family had never been simply that of a daughter. I was the designated fixer. At 16, I was the one sitting at the kitchen table reading water bills because my father claimed his eyes were too tired. At 19, I filed my parents' state and federal tax returns for the first time, continuing that obligation every spring thereafter. I managed my father Frank's blood pressure medications into plastic day-of-the-week dispensers, dealt with furnace breakdowns, and managed every domestic crisis that arose. My mother had a favorite phrase for this one-sided dynamic, delivered with the practiced sweetness of a Sunday morning sermon. That's what family does. But looking back, I can recall barely 3 instances in my life where that sentence arrived without a favor attached to it. During the first week of July, however, her voice on the telephone took on an unfamiliar, almost sugary warmth that stirred a quiet, persistent discomfort deep inside my chest. She called me twice in 48 hours to confirm my upcoming 34th birthday dinner. "We're holding it right here at the house, sweetheart," she purred smoothly through the receiver. Just family. Absolute privacy. Standing at my kitchen counter while drying the dinner dishes, I stared out the window at the gathering twilight and frowned at the silence. My mother had planned every major holiday in our extended family's history, yet she had not baked, bought, or acknowledged a birthday cake for me since I was 12 years old. I tried to soothe my rising intuition, telling myself that age softens people and that 61 brings grace to a woman's heart. I finished washing the plates, checked on Noah's peaceful breathing in his bedroom, and carefully folded the uneasy thought away like a shirt I knew I would never wear. The fragile, carefully maintained illusion of my tranquil suburban life shattered on a stiflingly humid Thursday afternoon at the CVS pharmacy on Dorothy Lane. Noah had developed a painful middle ear infection, and I stood at the main checkout counter holding his liquid antibiotic in one hand and my credit union debit card in the other. When the young cashier swiped the card through the terminal, the digital reader flashed a stark, gray message across the screen. Declined. Calmly assuming a minor bank processing glitch or a temporary network delay, I asked her politely to run the card a second time. Declined. Surprised and slightly flustered, I reached into my purse and pulled out my secondary Visa credit card, the one I strictly kept tucked away inside an inner leather slot for genuine medical emergencies. The payment terminal beeped sharply and displayed an immediate warning message. Suspected fraud. Call issuer. A quiet line was quickly forming behind me in the narrow aisle. A teenager holding a pair of energy drinks and an elderly woman resting heavily on a wooden cane, both politely averting their eyes while a hot, burning flush crept rapidly up my neck and cheeks. Maintaining the absolute icy composure I rely on in the ICU when a cardiac patient's telemetry monitor suddenly flatlines, I reached into the very bottom of my purse, pulled out 3 crumpled $20 bills from my emergency cash stash, paid for my son's prescription, and walked out to the parking lot. I sat behind the steering wheel of my SUV in the sweltering July heat, placing my right hand firmly over my heart, forcing myself to take 4 measured seconds to inhale and 4 seconds to exhale. Slow breath, Leah, I whispered aloud to the quiet interior of the vehicle, repeating the exact physiological script I used during hospital code blue. Look at the numbers. Never panic before you examine the actual chart. That night, after Noah was sound asleep in his room, with his favorite stuffed raccoon tucked securely under his arm, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and signed up for a comprehensive credit monitoring service, a tool I had spent years foolishly convincing myself I would never need. When my official personal profile finally loaded onto the bright screen, I sat alone in the darkness, reading my own name as if it belonged to an absolute stranger. Prominently listed at the top of my consumer file was an active Visa credit card account opened in the spring of 2022, a card I had never applied for, authorized, or held in my hands. The account carried a staggering balance of $4,800 and was formally marked 60 days past due, a single catastrophic delinquency that had dragged my once spotless credit score down a steep financial cliff. My hands remained perfectly steady on the keyboard. 12 years of managing traumatic injuries and cardiac arrests in the emergency room will gift a person that specific kind of physiological discipline. I clicked directly into the account details to locate the fraudster's registered billing address, fully expecting to find a Dropbox in Florida, an abandoned property, or an untraceable post office box in another city. Instead, the illuminated screen revealed a familiar residential address on Kettering Avenue in Dayton, the exact street number and two-story brick home where I had grown up. The next morning, I called the issuing bank's fraud department, placed an immediate 90-day fraud alert on my profile, and formally requested certified paper copies of the original credit application. Before ending the call, the kind customer service representative read back the primary contact phone number listed on the application file to verify my identity. A landline number I could recite in my sleep because it had been connected to the telephone wall mount in my parents' kitchen since 1998. I thanked the customer representative in my measured, clinical nurse's voice, ended the call, and stood motionless in my kitchen, staring blankly at my pale reflection mirrored in the black glass of the microwave door. Suddenly, a long-buried memory resurfaced from the deep fog of the past, a moment I had not permitted myself to inspect or question for 7 full years. When I was 27 years old, just a few months after Noah was born, I had received an official letter in the mail regarding a credit inquiry I did not recognize. Alarmed, I had driven straight to my parents' house with the document in my purse and placed it directly on the kitchen table. My father, Frank, had chuckled warmly, strolled into his private den, and pulled a neatly folded sheet of paper from the gray metal file box where he always claimed to keep my birth certificate and important documents safe. He handed me a letter, written on bank stationery, offering a polite apology for a clerical error that had been fully resolved. My mother had gently patted my hand, whispering, "Bank error, sweetheart. Your father already handled it. You have a newborn baby to feed. Go home and worry about him." Relieved, I had let the matter drop, convincing myself at the time that the stationery merely looked a shade too blue, and the official logo slightly misaligned. Sitting in my quiet kitchen 7 years later, the truth hit me with the devastating force of an physical impact. That letter had not been a bank clerical error, but a terrifying near miss where their secret operation had briefly leaked out. I reached for a legal pad and wrote down the only 2 names that fit every single undeniable fact: Frank and Carol Vance. I stared at the names, scratched them out with a thick black line, and then wrote them again, my hand trembling violently as tears finally spilled down my face. Sunday night brought another 12-hour shift in the ICU, and night shifts at St. Camillus have a specific, quiet rhythm during the early morning hours between 2 and 4. When the patient monitors hummed their steady lullaby and the break room coffee went cold, I sat down at a nurse's station terminal and officially requested my full, comprehensive credit reports from all 3 major bureaus. The break room laser printer hummed softly in the dark, spitting out approximately 40 pages of detailed financial history that I carried to a corner table, reading them with the exact clinical rigor I apply to a crashing patient's chart. Fast first to assess the immediate damage, then slow to examine every single line item. What I discovered was far worse than a single delinquent Visa account. Spread across 12 long years was an entire shadow life written under my name. A credit card opened in June 2014, another in 2016, a department store card in 2017, a personal loan in 2019, and additional accounts opened in 2020 and 2022. 9 accounts in total, representing $19,400 in open, rotting balances, currently dragging my identity into the mud. Using my color-coded chart pens, I plotted the timeline on a legal pad and stared at the earliest entry, June 2014. That was the exact month I graduated from nursing school, packed my cardboard boxes, and moved out of my parents' house at 21. Someone had waited patiently for me to step out the front door, and that very same week opened a hidden financial door behind me using my own social security number. Denise, a veteran cardiac nurse, stuck her head into the break room and asked if I was all right. I smiled gently and told her I was just reviewing a complex case file, which was the absolute truth. I was reading 12 years of my life, authored by someone else's hand. Over the next 3 days, I turned my kitchen table into a methodical caseboard, assigning every account its own detailed row: date opened, current balance, and payment status. As I cross-referenced the dates against major events in my life, a crucial pattern emerged that finally solved the mystery of why my credit score hadn't collapsed when I bought my condo in 2021. My mother had been practicing a sophisticated financial maneuver known as rollover accounting, opening new credit lines to pay off older balances just before major milestones in my life, maintaining my credit score at the exact threshold necessary for me to secure a mortgage, only to let the debt accumulate again once the transaction cleared. But by 2024, as inflation rose and her cash flow withered, she had simply abandoned the payments altogether, leaving the $19,400 to rot in plain sight. Furthermore, every single statement across all 9 accounts was directed to the 2-story brick house on Kettering Avenue. For 12 years, every late notice, collection letter, and privacy policy update had been delivered directly to my childhood bedroom, completely insulated from my sight and control. This was no longer a mysterious string of unfortunate coincidences. It was a deliberate, calculated methodology. I sat in the quiet hum of my kitchen, staring at the 2 names written on my legal pad, Frank and Carol Vance. My colleague Tessa had urged me to call my mother immediately, suggesting there might be an innocent explanation. But as an experienced ICU nurse, I knew you don't wake a patient to ask if they're bleeding. You check the chart first. Calling my mother prematurely would only yield theatrical tears, rehearsed excuses, and a bonfire of evidence in her backyard before morning. Standing over my kitchen caseboard, I made a quiet vow to stay composed and uncover every single layer of truth. On Monday morning, fueled by cold coffee and an unyielding quiet resolve, I bypassed sleep after my shift and drove downtown to the Montgomery County Recorder's office. I paid the clerk $2 for a document search, and what she handed across the counter provided the definitive, terrifying spine for the past 12 years. It was a general, durable financial power of attorney, granting Frank and Carol Vance full, unmitigated authority over all my bank accounts, real estate, and personal loans. The document bore an official notary stamp dated March 14th, 2019, a date etched forever into my soul. On March 12th, 2019, I had been admitted to Miami Valley Hospital with severe preeclampsia. My body hooked to fetal monitors and blood pressure cuffs, while doctors warned me not to stand up without assistance. My son, Noah, was born on March 15 via emergency delivery. On March 14, while I was lying in a hospital bed miles away fighting to keep my unborn child safe, someone had walked into a notary office on the far side of Dayton and sworn under oath that I was standing before them, cheerfully signing away my entire financial life to my parents. The notary, a longtime acquaintance of my father, who had accepted a discreet favor to skip identity verification, had stamped the document alongside 2 witness lines. That fraudulent power of attorney was the skeleton key that unlocked 12 years of systematic theft, allowing them to bypass bank security without my knowledge. Holding those certified copies in my trembling hands, I realized the full, crushing depth of the betrayal. While I was struggling to give life to my son, my own parents were legally erasing mine. I tucked the paper into my folder, feeling my heart turn to cold, immutable stone. That single forged document became the foundation of my entire investigation. The following evening, I attended Tuesday dinner at my parents' house, observing the scene with the detached focus of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. My mother presided over the table with her customary flourish, serving a lavish platter of slow-smoked barbecue brisket and creamed corn, while directing the conversation with the swift flick of a wrist. Extra portion of meat for my brother Julian, quiet comments about my demanding hospital shifts, and repeated reminders about the upcoming head count for my 34th birthday cake. I watched them pass the serving dishes around the polished wood, thinking to myself, you owe $19,400 in my name, and you're worried about birthday cake head count? Midway through the meal, my mother stepped out onto the back porch to take a quiet phone call. Seizing those brief 4 minutes of absolute solitude, I walked past the dining room china hutch, the glass cabinet housing fine porcelain nobody ever ate off. Underneath a stack of pristine Easter napkins, I spotted the worn corner of a manila folder. I reached inside and opened it. Inside were dozens of pages of lined legal paper covered in a single name written in various inks over many years. Leah Vance. Leah Vance. Leah Vance. The earliest pages, from 2014, were clumsy, the loops awkward and uneven. But by the recent pages, the script was flawless, smoother and more consistent than my own hand after an exhausting 12-hour shift. It was not an act of sudden desperation or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was a dedicated rehearsal. Someone had sat at this very dining table for a decade, practicing my signature like piano scales, until the forgery played better than the original. Standing in that quiet dining room, I stared at the ink with chilling clarity. Every curve and flourish was evidence of a calculated, methodical operation. Beneath the endless pages of practiced signatures lay another set of documents that stopped the breath in my lungs. Bank statements belonging to my late grandmother, Margaret Vance, spanning 2019 to 2021. The final 2 years of her life spent living in my parents' home. Running the numbers on my phone's calculator with clinical precision, I watched a horrifying truth materialize. Small, steady monthly withdrawals, totaling over $23,000, had been systematically drained from her school teacher's pension account using a caregiver debit card attached to her file. The last withdrawal had cleared just 4 days before her heart failed in the autumn of 2021. Memories flooded back in painful waves of Grandma Margaret fretting in her wooden wheelchair that her modest pension money seemed short every single month, and the entire family chuckling condescendingly, claiming she was just getting forgetful in her old age. She hadn't been forgetful at all. I remembered her grabbing my wrist firmly in the kitchen months before she passed away, looking into my eyes and whispering softly, "This family eats its quiet ones, Leah. Don't be quiet the wrong way." She had known exactly what was happening to her money, which was why she had quietly locked away a $40,000 certificate of deposit years earlier. The untouchable financial fortress that my mother's sweet-talking couldn't open. The very money that later became the down payment on my condo. My grandmother hadn't lost her mind. She had hidden her final legacy from her own family. To protect me from the exact same fate. Standing in that quiet dining room, hearing my mother's footsteps returning from the porch, I carefully photographed every single page with my phone, closed the glass cabinet door, and smoothed the napkins, knowing that the time for silent endurance was officially over, and that I owed it to both my grandmother and my son to fight for the truth. On Wednesday morning, following another exhausting night shift, I decided to call my credit union, the small, community-focused financial institution on Far Hills Avenue where I had secured my home mortgage back in 2021. I spoke directly with Gary, a kind, soft-spoken loan officer who always keeps a glass jar of butterscotch candies on his desk and remembers every member's name. I needed the quiet reassurance that my actual home was safe, so I asked him to run a routine administrative audit on my property title. Gary pulled up my electronic master file and confirmed that my mortgage payments were completely up to date, my title was clear, and no unexpected liens had been registered against the condo. However, because small-town credit union officers are naturally conversational, Gary hesitated briefly before adding a curious detail that set my pulse racing. He mentioned that just 3 weeks prior, their underwriting department had received a formal property verification request from an outside regional lender. It was a standard asset and encumbrance check, the exact administrative inquiry triggered when a property owner applies to refinance or secure a heavy equity loan. My hand tightened around the telephone receiver as the room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Everything I had uncovered in my 3-ring binder so far belonged strictly to the past tense. Money already spent, forged credit cards already maxed out, old financial wounds already scarring my consumer profile. But an asset check was a verb in the active present tense. Somewhere across Dayton, an unfamiliar financial institution was currently evaluating my condo's market value and total equity. Something brand new was actively being constructed under my name, and it was fast approaching completion. For the first time since my debit card was declined at the pharmacy counter, I was no longer merely investigating a past crime. I was actively standing in the path of an ongoing one. Later that afternoon, While carefully cross-referencing every page in my master binder against the timeline taped inside my bedroom closet door, my eyes caught a small, folded piece of paper I had almost skimmed past. It was a credit bureau notice, dated 5 weeks prior. A hard inquiry notification generated by a national card issuer. But as I brought the paper under the lamp, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The name on the credit inquiry was not Leah Vance. It was Noah Vance, my 7-year-old son. Someone had taken his social security number, issued at a hospital administrative desk 7 years ago, and entered it into an online credit application. My parents had waited until I graduated nursing school at 21 before opening their first fraudulent account under my name. For my son, they hadn't even waited for his baby teeth to fall out. The realization hit me not as a wave of grief, but as a blinding, crystalline awakening. They were actively expanding their fraud enterprise into the next generation, preparing to shackle my innocent child with debt before he even learned to ride his bicycle without falling. In that precise second, the last lingering embers of filial obligation, guilt, and false hope were instantly incinerated. In my profession, when a patient's vital signs plummet into critical condition, panic is a luxury that kills. You immediately transition into fierce, protective action. I sat down at my laptop, accessed all 3 credit bureaus, and executed a permanent, legal credit freeze for my minor child, a critical defense mechanism that every parent should know exists. Looking at the digital confirmation screen, my maternal instincts crystallized into an unshakable fortress. I was no longer fighting merely to restore my own identity. I was standing as an iron shield over my son's future. On Sunday evening, as I stood in my kitchen preparing dinner, there was a sudden, sharp double knock at my front door. The unmistakable, deliberate rhythm of a law enforcement officer. Opening the door, I found my neighbor, Artie Pendleton, standing on the mat with his old basset hound, Barnaby, leaning heavily against his knee. Artie's weathered face carried a serious, vigilant expression, honed by 30 years on active sheriff's patrol. He handed me a torn slip of paper from a local hardware store receipt, upon which he had neatly written down a vehicle license plate number out of long-standing professional habit. Artie explained that over the past 6 days, he had observed an unmarked gray sedan creeping slowly through our complex parking lot on 3 separate occasions. Earlier that morning, Artie had watched through his porch binoculars as the driver stepped out, approached my condo, and systematically took high-resolution photographs of both my front deadbolt and the sliding glass patio door at the rear, even using a measuring tape across the door frames. Holding that paper receipt, the heavy dam I had constructed between my private ordeal and the outside world quietly gave way. I invited Artie inside, poured 2 cups of fresh coffee, and revealed the core truth. The forged power of attorney, the 9 unauthorized credit lines, and my mother's bizarre, persistent questions regarding my fireproof document box. Artie listened with the quiet, unblinking focus of a seasoned deputy. When I finished, he placed his mug down and offered the most powerful advice I had heard in weeks. Kid, you don't need a shoulder to cry on right now. You need a formal criminal case number. Artie immediately dialed a contact at the department, ran the license plate, and discovered the sedan was registered to a commercial locksmith company operating out of Eastern Dayton. Equipped with Artie's law enforcement receipt and my comprehensive binder, I secured the earliest available appointment with Detective Mara Reyes at the Kettering Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Reyes was a compact, sharp woman in her mid-40s, with wire-rimmed reading glasses resting on a silver chain and a firm, commanding handshake that conveyed absolute professional competence. Sitting in a quiet office that smelled faintly of fresh printer toner and old paper files, I handed her my organized folder and remained completely silent while she read. For 20 uninterrupted minutes, Detective Reyes turned pages, cross-referenced dates, and methodically examined the certified power of attorney from Montgomery County alongside the high-resolution photographs of my mother's handwriting practice sheets. When she finally looked up over her glasses, her sharp eyes held deep professional respect for the meticulous documentation laid out before her. She slid Gary's credit union memo back across the desk and tapped her pen twice on the paper for emphasis. Miss Vance, everything in this binder from 2014 to 2022 represents historical fraud, Reyes stated with surgical clarity and absolute authority. It's entirely prosecutable, but it's historical. This asset check on your condo, however, is an active crime in progress. Reyes explained that her department had traced the pending application. A home equity loan for $85,000 was currently sitting in underwriting at a regional mortgage lender, listing Leah Vance as the primary borrower and secured directly against my Maple Crossing property. The application was being executed using the fraudulent 2019 power of attorney, and the final loan closing was officially scheduled to fund that very week. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the discovery, realizing that my methodical record-keeping had caught them in the act of committing a major felony against my home and threatening to steal the roof over my son's head. Standing in Detective Reyes's office, the final pieces of my mother's elaborate puzzle snapped into absolute, chilling alignment. The loan was scheduled to officially close and fund on Friday morning. The exact little bank appointment my mother had cheerfully mentioned on the phone 10 days prior. To finalize an $85,000 home equity loan on a property that had recently undergone a divorce, the mortgage lender's title company required specific original documentation: my physical property deed and my certified divorce decree. The exact legal papers resting inside the gray fireproof document box on my bedroom closet shelf. My mother's sudden, unprecedented eagerness to throw me a 34th birthday dinner on Wednesday night was never a genuine gesture of maternal affection. It was a carefully engineered alibi and tactical distraction. She had scheduled the party at her house to guarantee my absence from my condo for 4 full hours, providing her hired commercial locksmith the exact window needed to breach my doors, open my closet, and retrieve the original documents required for Friday's closing. Detective Reyes looked at me intently across her desk, outlining our strategic counter-operation. We aren't going to alert them or cancel the bank appointment, Reyes revealed with a cold, professional smile that brought immense comfort to my soul. The lender's fraud division has already flagged the file internally, but on the outside, the application will remain completely active. They think they are walking toward an $85,000 payout, completely unaware that they are walking straight into a federal law enforcement trap. I drove home beneath the summer oak trees with my windows rolled down, feeling the heavy, suffocating burden of victimhood vanish entirely from my chest, replaced by the cool, unyielding strength of a mother defending her sanctuary, protecting her son, and preparing to reclaim her life once and for all. On Saturday morning, I set about transforming my home from a vulnerable target into an impenetrable fortress, executing every defense measure with legal precision, quiet composure, and physical receipts. I installed a commercial-grade deadbolt on the front door, mounted a sleek video doorbell camera above the welcome mat, and fitted the sliding glass patio door in the rear with a heavy steel security bar. My condo. My absolute right. No permission required from anyone. A realization that felt profoundly poetic after 12 years of systemic intrusion. Then, I executed the tactic that would have made Artie laugh his gravelly laugh. I completely emptied my fireproof document box. Every authentic, irreplaceable document, my property deed, birth certificate, Noah's social security card, the certified copies of the fraudulent power of attorney, my original divorce decree, and my late grandmother's savings bond, was transported downtown and locked securely inside a bank safety deposit box next to my duplicate evidence binder. The gray metal fireproof box itself remained on its usual shelf in my bedroom closet, visible from the doorway and maintaining its exact customary weight. But inside, I packed it entirely with photocopies of junk mail, expired grocery coupons, utility circulars, and a single sheet of blank white printer paper resting quietly at the top. If my mother sent someone to breach my private sanctuary, they would retrieve precisely what they had earned through their deception. Absolute nothingness. Standing in the closet doorway, admiring the decoy box, I experienced a quiet, weightless sense of liberation. For years, I had believed that keeping domestic peace meant surrendering my boundaries to placate my family's unquenchable demands. Now, I understood that true peace is not maintained through passive submission, but built through active, unyielding self-preservation, strategic discipline, and ironclad self-respect. Sitting in my quiet hallway, I looked at the new hardware with immense pride, knowing that my son's sanctuary was now fully protected. On Tuesday afternoon, 24 hours before my scheduled birthday dinner, my father arrived at my condo completely unannounced, an event that had occurred perhaps 4 times in the past 5 years. He stood on my doormat holding a tiny cardboard box containing wood screws, claiming he had brought them for a wooden shelf I had casually mentioned months ago. I did not invite him inside. Instead, we stood on the threshold, engaging in polite, superficial chatter about the summer heat wave, the local baseball team, and Noah's bicycle. The entire time, however, my father's eyes continually darted away from mine, fixing nervously upon the door hardware, first the hinges, then the strike plate, and finally resting on the gleaming, newly installed brushed nickel deadbolt. I watched him notice the fresh hardware, and I watched him struggle valiantly to conceal his anxiety. "Put in new locks, I see," he finally observed, his voice carefully casual, yet laced with a subtle, trembling strain that nearly broke my heart. "Old locks wear out, Dad," I replied flatly, holding his gaze without flinching. He nodded at the deadbolt, as if it were a sleeping dog that might suddenly snap. "Well, good luck," he murmured softly, turning his cap in his calloused hands. "Cautious is smart. You always were the careful one in the family." For 2 brief seconds, my father actually looked at me, truly looked into my eyes for the first time in longer than I could remember. Something heavy moved behind his weathered face, an unspoken warning, an ember of paternal guilt desperately searching for an exit. But it found no outlet. He handed me the small box of screws, bade me goodbye, and drove away in his ancient pickup truck. Standing on the mat, I let myself process the mistake. He had seen the new deadbolt. That intelligence would immediately travel back to my mother, and their machine would adjust. That evening, my kitchen table hosted the most extraordinary tactical strategy meeting of my professional life. An ICU nurse, a retired sheriff's deputy, and a financial crimes detective sat drinking decaf coffee around a surface decorated with Noah's crayon drawings of Barnaby. Artie brought the crucial piece of intelligence that completed our operational map. His contact in the local locksmith community confirmed that a commercial job had been officially booked for Wednesday evening, a full lock rekeying at my Maple Crossing address, ordered by a woman identifying herself as the family's property manager. Detective Reyes placed her mug down on the table and laid out the legal mechanics with clinical precision. A rekeying ordered by a non-owner, combined with unauthorized entry into a private residence, was the exact point where a paper case transformed into active felony charges in progress. "Your birthday dinner isn't a family celebration, Leah," Reyes stated plainly, her voice completely devoid of illusions. "It's an alibi she engineered to guarantee you're across town while someone breaches your home." Reyes outlined our 2-phase operation. The police unit would not intervene prematurely. They would position 2 unmarked patrol cars in my complex parking lot on Wednesday evening, allowing the locksmith and whoever accompanied him to commit the overt act of breaking and entering before moving in for the arrest. The trap was set entirely by their own greed and scheduling. All I had to do was show up to my birthday dinner, eat the lemon cake, and maintain absolute silence. As Reyes stood up to leave, she turned to me with an iron look that carried immense reassurance. "Whatever happens at that dining table tomorrow night, let it happen. Don't warn them, don't stall them, and don't help them. You're not an officer, Leah. You're a guest at your own birthday. Just play your part." Wednesday morning dawned bright, warm, and deceptively ordinary, with neighborhood sprinklers ticking softly across manicured lawns in the midsummer heat. I spent the morning making blueberry pancakes for Noah, watching him eat 4 with enthusiasm before we took his bicycle out to the paved parking lot for his daily morning ride. Artie sat comfortably on his front stoop with his coffee mug, casually monitoring the perimeter, while Barnaby dozed peacefully in the shadow of the ancient oak tree. Noah executed 3 flawless laps around the parking islands without putting a single foot down, turning back to me with a beaming, radiant smile. "Mom, did you see me?" "I saw everything, baby," I replied, squeezing his small shoulder tightly, holding that innocent moment close to my heart. Packing his overnight bag for a sleepover at my friend Tessa's house felt like the most sacred duty of the entire day. Pajamas, toothbrush, and his favorite stuffed raccoon that he pretended he didn't need anymore. Tessa, a veteran ICU nurse herself, asked no probing questions when I dropped him off at her front door. She simply hugged me tightly and whispered, "Keep him here as long as you need, Leah. We've got him completely safe." Returning to my quiet condo, I laid out my outfit on the bed. A simple blue dress that felt comfortable for sitting still through an emotional storm. I stood before the bathroom mirror and practiced what we call in the emergency room my nurse face. The calm, warm, level expression that reassures patients while a critical emergency unfolds behind closed doors. Eyes soft, jaw relaxed, a gentle smile that reveals nothing. I had maintained that face through cardiac arrests and traumatic loss. I could certainly hold it through a family dinner. Sitting on the edge of my bed, taking deep, rhythmic breaths, I centered myself entirely, ready to face whatever lay ahead with absolute dignity and composure. Just 45 minutes before I was scheduled to leave for my parents' house, my phone buzzed on the counter with an urgent text message from Detective Reyes. Attached were 2 high-resolution photographic files that shattered my remaining emotional illusions once and for all. The first image was a clean digital scan of the original 2019 power of attorney from the notary's retained archive. The previously smeared second witness line had been digitally enhanced, revealing a slanting, familiar signature I would recognize anywhere on Earth. Julian Frank Vance. My younger brother. The second photograph was an official bank payoff receipt dated March 23, 2019, showing an $11,000 delinquent loan on Julian's lifted pickup truck paid off in full via a single wire transfer from my parents' account, just 9 days after the fraudulent power of attorney was stamped. Reyes' caption was concise and sharp. Confirmed this afternoon. Thought you should know before you look at him tonight. Standing alone in my bedroom, holding the phone over my blue dress, I did the painful math I had spent weeks avoiding. During the exact week I was hooked to hospital monitors, fighting for my newborn son's life, my own brother had stood at a notary counter, sworn under oath he watched me sign away my rights, and sold his sister's financial freedom for $11,000. The truck he had washed, polished, and bragged about at every single Tuesday dinner was bought with the currency of my betrayal. My heart did not shatter. Instead, it settled into a cold, unbreakable clarity. I smoothed my dress, checked my nurse face in the mirror, and picked up my purse, officially reclassifying my brother from family to an active co-conspirator as I stepped out the door into the gathering twilight. As I drove down Maple Ridge Drive, my pulse remained perfectly steady, anchored in the unwavering certainty that truth and justice were finally on my side. At precisely 6:30 on Wednesday evening, I parked my SUV behind my aunt's Buick in my parents' driveway and paused to look at the house I had grown up in. The porch light glowed warmly against the twilight, illuminating a dining room staged to perfection. An ironed, pristine tablecloth, fine china aligned in neat formation, and a 3 top-tier lemon cake from Ashley's Bakery, resting on the sideboard like a prized centerpiece. My mother opened the front door before I could even knock, wrapping her arms around me in an embrace that smelled heavily of Shalimar perfume and lemon frosting. I hugged her back, feeling through the soft wool of her cardigan how fragile her physical frame actually was. This woman who had quietly orchestrated 12 years of my financial identity from a kitchen landline. Aunt Evelyn greeted me next, slipping a card into my hand, away from my mother's watchful gaze, while my father stood near the patio window, silently peeling the paper label off his beer bottle and offering a muted, "Happy birthday, kiddo," to a spot slightly left of my eyes. Julian arrived last, freshly showered and smiling, playfully ruffling my hair as if I were still 9 years old. Throughout the meal of tender pot roast and seasoned vegetables, my mother conducted the table like a seasoned theatrical director, redirecting every conversation toward light-hearted pleasantries, while Julian nervously checked his phone, then the wall clock, then my mother's eyes, a tense triangle of glances that repeated itself 5 times before dessert. My mother stood up, tapped her glass with the silver ring, and delivered an eloquent toast about family unity, roots, and pride in my nursing career, concluding with her grand flourish. "Everything you have, Leah, came from this family." Sitting at that table, maintaining my level nurse face, I raised my glass and drank, knowing that behind her charming performance lay a clock ticking toward an explosive reckoning. The candles on the birthday cake remained unlit in their box as my mother leaned over to my father's ear, dropping her voice to the specific low register she naively believed was completely private. "Since everyone is gathered here," she whispered with chilled efficiency, "have your son drive over to her apartment and change those locks right now." My father's jaw worked once, like a man swallowing a bitter pill without water, but he gave the smallest, most resigned nod a grown man could produce, lightly touching Julian's shoulder as he reached past him for the coffee carafe. Julian set his cloth napkin beside his plate, stood up smoothly, and announced to the room that he had to step outside to take an urgent call regarding a construction job estimate. I watched his fingers thumb through his heavy keyring, selecting the newly cut brass key that he believed would unlock my front door. Aunt Evelyn called after him, urging him to stay for the cake cutting, but Julian merely waved his hand, promising to return in 2 minutes before letting the screen door slap shut behind him. We all heard his truck engine roar to life and his headlights sweep across the dining room window as he pulled out of the driveway, heading straight toward Maple Crossing, toward a heavy steel security bar, a newly installed brushed nickel deadbolt, an active video doorbell camera, and 2 unmarked police cruisers waiting silently in the dark. For 61 agonizing minutes, I sat at that dining table performing the most demanding nursing shift of my life, monitoring a domestic crisis that had already entered its terminal phase. I ate my slice of lemon cake, complimented my mother on the frosting, and smiled as she chattered happily about how much lighter everything would feel after Friday, keeping my pulse perfectly steady at 60 beats per minute. The silence of the evening was violently shattered when headlights flashed wildly against the living room curtains, and a vehicle pulled into the driveway at dangerous speed. The front door burst open so hard it knocked the decorative summer wreath askew against the drywall, and my brother Julian stumbled into the dining room, looking like a trauma patient entering an emergency room, his face the color of bleached hospital sheets, his eyes wide with unbridled panic, and his keyring hanging upside down from his trembling index finger. He bypassed the rest of the family and lunged straight toward my mother's chair, leaning down to whisper into her ear. But the room had gone so utterly motionless that his frantic voice echoed off the walls like a public broadcast. "Mom, they're there," Julian wheezed, his breath catching in his throat. "Police officers at her complex. They intercepted the locksmith in the parking lot right as he set up his tools. They have official court papers, Mom. A search warrant. A detective. They knew my name the second I stepped out of the truck. They know about Friday's bank closing." A suffocating, vacuum-like stillness settled over the room. Aunt Evelyn's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My cousins went completely rigid, and my father went ash gray around the lips, placing both hands flat on the tablecloth as if trying to stabilize a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. My mother's hostess smile hung on her face a full second past its expiration, before decaying into pure horror as her mind frantically calculated the unsolvable arithmetic of her exposure. At that exact moment, my father's phone rang loudly on the bare wood, the caller ID displaying the regional bank's corporate office 2 days ahead of Friday's appointment, confirming that the financial fortress they had built on lies had completely dissolved. My mother stood up so violently her chair screeched against the hardwood floor, her former elegance evaporating into raw, unbridled fury as she pointed a shaking finger down the length of the table at me. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice rising into a sharp, hysterical register. "Leah, what did you do? You called the police on your own family? Sitting calmly in my chair, with my hands folded neatly over my napkin, I looked directly into her eyes and used the quiet, immovable voice I reserve for 2 a.m. when panic erupts in the ICU. "You're right, Mom," I said softly, my voice slicing through the chaos like a quiet bell. "Even the debt." I reached into my purse, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it face up into the center of the tablecloth. I didn't call the police on my family. I filed a formal report about 2 people who forged my signature on a power of attorney while I was lying in a hospital bed giving birth to your grandson. I gestured toward the document resting on the table. And that paper right there is a credit bureau inquiry from 5 weeks ago, an application run on your 7-year-old grandson, Noah. Pass it around. Aunt Evelyn reached out, read her grandnephew's name and age on the credit check, and set the paper down as if it were burning hot, turning to my mother with a voice thick with horror. "Carol, he is 7 years old." My mother tried to pivot to tears, wailing about her sacrifices, before attempting to shift the blame onto my father. But Frank Vance, staring at his hands, uttered the only honest words of his life. "She's telling the truth, Carol. All of it." My mother attempted one final, desperate stand, drawing herself up with rigid chin and invoking the emotional authority that had ruled our family for 4 decades. "I am your mother. This is my house. We are your family, and family doesn't need permission." I stood up slowly, picked up my purse, and looked her dead in the eye with an unshakable sense of inner peace and absolute clarity. "It does now, Mom," I said quietly. "It's called a search warrant." I walked into the kitchen, picked up the beautiful half-eaten lemon cake from the counter, and met Aunt Evelyn at the back door. She put both hands gently on my face, her eyes shining with tears, and whispered, "Call me whenever you need me, Leanne. I mean it with all my heart." I drove the 15 minutes home to Maple Crossing with the windows down, feeling the cool July night air wash over my skin as the lemon cake rested safely in the passenger seat beside me. The complex parking lot was quiet again. The locksmith van was long gone, and one unmarked police car sat peacefully in the dark distance. In his brightly illuminated front window, Artie stood, holding his mug, giving me a small, formal 2-inch nod, the unspoken salute of a veteran officer acknowledging a successful operation, while Barnaby's tail thumped softly against the windowpane. I unlocked my front door, turned my new deadbolt like silk, and stepped across the threshold into a home that was finally, completely, and irrevocably mine. I sat at my clean kitchen counter, ate another small bite of sweet lemon cake, and realized that my long, silent war for dignity was officially over. True love had never required surrendering my keys or suffering in silence. It was the quiet, sacred courage to stand firm in the light of truth and protect the sanctuary I had built for my son. A full year had passed since the legal storm swept across Kettering and cleared away the debris of a 12-year deception, and our little corner of Maple Crossing had evolved into a profound sanctuary of peace, recovery, and quiet triumph. The autumn leaves outside my living room window painted the air in vibrant shades of amber and gold, mirroring the steady restoration of joy and stability within our walls. My son, Noah, now 8 years old, rode his bicycle across the parking lot with an effortless, soaring speed, no longer just learning to navigate the pavement, but fully owning the ground beneath him. Watching him from my front stoop, I often marveled at how completely children absorb safety when they are surrounded by genuine truth and unwavering protection. Our neighbor Artie still sat on his front chair during the crisp afternoons, his faithful basset hound Barnaby resting his heavy, graying head across Artie's boots. Both of them serving as gentle, eternal sentinels over our daily lives. The new brushed nickel deadbolt on my front door gleamed softly in the autumn sunlight, not as a fearful barrier against a hostile world, but as a silent, physical affirmation of boundaries earned through fierce resilience. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon tea and roasted apples, replacing the clinical tension of my early investigative days with the warm, breathable fragrance of an unhurried home. I still worked my 12-hour night shifts in the ICU at St. Camillus, but the heavy, suffocating weight I used to carry in my chest had long since dissolved, replaced by a deep, unshakable confidence in my own strength and the unblemished future we were building together day by day. Every single morning began with a quiet cup of fresh coffee and an open mailbox, reminding me that the darkest nights of the human soul always yield to an unshakable, luminous dawn. On a quiet Sunday morning in late October, As Noah sat cross-legged on the living room rug, working intently on a complex Lego spaceship, he looked up with a thoughtful, serious expression and asked about the heavy steel lock on our back door and the framed savings bond hanging proudly above my desk. In the past, I might have hesitated or searched for a soft euphemism, fearing that the ugly truth of family betrayal might bruise his young, innocent heart. But standing in the warm, sunlit quiet of our living room, surrounded by the tangible evidence of our recovery, I realized that true emotional healing requires neither hiding the shadows nor dwelling in them, but meeting them with honest, empowering clarity and absolute grace. I knelt beside him on the rug, took his small, paint-smudged hands in mine, and spoke with gentle, unvarnished truth. I explained that some adults, even those who share our blood, sometimes forget how to be honest and try to take what doesn't belong to them, but that a mother's primary job is to stand like an iron wall between her children and any harm that comes their way. I told him about his great-grandmother Margaret, the smart, quiet lady who had hidden her final treasure so that we would always have a safe roof over our heads. Noah listened with the profound, undivided attention characteristic of children who understand more than adults give them credit for, before wrapping his small arms tightly around my neck and whispering, "We're safe here, aren't we, Mom?" In that sacred, unhurried moment of mother-son connection, I felt the final invisible chains of my past snap entirely, replaced by an extraordinary, radiant wave of maternal peace that washed away every remaining vestige of old trauma, fear, and lingering doubt once and for all. Later that evening, after Noah had drifted off to a peaceful sleep with his favorite stuffed raccoon clutched against his chest, I walked down the carpeted hallway and stood before my bedroom closet shelf. Reaching up, I lifted down the gray metal fireproof box that had once served as the deceptive epicenter of my family's multi-year fraud enterprise. I opened the latch and pulled out the single sheet of blank white paper resting at the very top, beneath which sat only expired grocery coupons and utility junk mail. In the early days of my investigation, looking at that decoy box had filled my stomach with a cold, sickening mixture of rage, betrayal, and nauseating anxiety. But tonight, standing in the quiet pool of bedside lamplight, running my fingers over the dented metal corners of the empty box, I felt only a profound, detached sense of closure. That box was no longer a symbol of victimization or hidden manipulation. It was a physical monument to my awakening, a tangible reminder of the exact moment I chose to stop swallowing disrespect and started auditing my own life with clinical precision. I slid the decoy box back onto the shelf next to my spare winter sweaters, leaving it exactly where it belonged, as a relic of a war that had already been decisively won. Returning to my desk, I looked up at the framed savings bond from Grandma Margaret hanging on the wall above my laptop. Her bold, elegant signature stood out clearly against the aged parchment paper. A stark, beautiful contrast to the endless pages of practiced forgery hidden inside my mother's china hutch. Running my fingertips gently across the glass frame, I whispered a silent, heartfelt prayer of gratitude to the grandmother who had loved me enough to leave behind a map through the dark. The legal fallout from that fateful birthday dinner rippled through the Montgomery County court system with the deliberate, unyielding momentum of a slow-moving freight train. My mother, Carol Vance, faced multiple felony counts, including identity theft, grand forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. Her defense strategy of calling it a simple family misunderstanding swiftly dismantled by Detective Reyes's immaculate evidence binder and Julian's cooperative testimony. My father, Frank, pleaded guilty to lesser charges of conspiracy and complicity, quietly accepting a sentence of probation and community service, without offering a single word of public excuse. Finally, allowing the heavy curtain of silence to drop permanently over his lifetime of quiet complicity. Julian, burdened by the crushing weight of his $11,000 truck payoff betrayal and the sudden collapse of his entitlement, moved out of the county entirely, attempting to rebuild a shattered reputation in a distant state where nobody knew his name. Throughout the court proceedings, I attended every single hearing, not out of vengeance or malice, but with the steady, calm posture of an ICU nurse monitoring a critical patient, observing the vital signs of a corrupted system finally collapsing under the weight of legal accountability. I never answered the frantic phone calls from my parents' high-priced defense attorney, nor did I ever open the lengthy, tear-soaked letters my mother mailed to my condo. Some bridges are not meant to be repaired. When a foundation is built entirely on quicksand and systemic theft, the kindest and most courageous thing a person can do is walk away and refuse to look back. My Aunt Evelyn remained the sole bridge to my extended family, calling every Sunday evening to discuss baking recipes, gardening tips, and Noah's spelling grades, proving that genuine love and loyalty survive only where mutual respect is actively practiced and cherished. Standing on my front porch on a crisp November evening, I watched the pale moon rise slowly over the quiet rooftops of Maple Crossing, casting a silvery glow across the paved parking lot and the distant line of autumn oak trees. The cool night air felt remarkably crisp and clean against my skin, carrying the subtle, comforting scent of burning fireplace wood and damp earth from a neighboring yard. I leaned comfortably against the sturdy wooden railing, wrapped my favorite wool cardigan tightly around my shoulders, and felt a quiet, radiant smile spread naturally across my face. Inside our warm, beautifully illuminated home, the soft glow of the living room lamp cast a golden light across the hardwood floor, perfectly illuminating the sanctuary I had fought so fiercely to build and protect. I knew that life would inevitably bring new seasons, unpredictable storms, and unexpected challenges along the winding road ahead, but I no longer feared the dark or the unknown horizon. I possessed the ultimate, unbreakable armor, an unshakable sense of self-worth, an indestructible bond of absolute trust with my son, and the profound, immovable certainty that true peace is a fortress built from within, through truth, boundaries, and uncompromising integrity. To anyone currently standing in the cold, suffocating shadow of toxic family exploitation, struggling to find the courage to lock their doors and protect their own soul, My journey stands as an enduring, hopeful testament. Hold your line with absolute conviction. Guard your peace as your most sacred asset. And never surrender your self-respect for the hollow illusion of family approval. True liberation begins the exact moment you stop financing your own emotional erasure and step boldly, unapologetically, into the brilliant light of your own unshakable truth. I took one last deep, grateful breath of the sweet autumn air, turned the smooth brass doorknob, and stepped back inside my home, closing the heavy door firmly behind me. The long, exhausting war was finally over, and the victory belonged forever to dignity, justice, and unconditional love.